Amen to that singing. That was really, really impressive. I kind of got asked last minute, and whenever I hear young people and mature people as well to sing, you know what? Let's make some room and let's make it happen. And so I just want to make sure I'm out of the sight of the projector here, make sure that I don't get blinded. So, like I said, it's good to be here today, and it's nice to see so many people here. I'm continuing on with my, not mine, sorry. I borrowed this from Amazing Discoveries, this series. And I emailed them and asked them and everything, and it was on the up and up, so they know we're doing it. And I basically took the same information, I repackaged some of it, and in this particular one I actually changed the order of the way it was done because I just felt it flowed better for myself. And so here we go. Evolution versus creation, and for me it's been such a blessing to do this series. And we've gone through so many points. I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of a brief review for those who have seen it, and if you haven't been here for it before, it'll be kind of new for you, and you can still see it. By all means, if you have questions about it, I can totally share with you after the service. And so, starting off, this was the definition of of faith, according to the Bible, right? Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And when we started to study what evolutionists and creationists, what our faith is built on, and it comes down to faith is having what you believe to be evidence, but yet it's not proven, right? And so Time had released this several years ago, and Is God Dead? And when we kind of went over, this is our first one, we were talking about the creation of the universe according to, of course, as creationists, we know how everything was created, no big deal, we can find it right here in our Bible. But just so everyone's aware on how evolution was going to came about, they say that at one point, about, I think it was between 12.5 billion to 20 billion years ago, there was an explosion called the Big Bang, and from that point, everything that exists today came from that bang. And the way they explained it is, everything came from nothing. And that's literally the terms they use. They use that term, that everything came from nothing. And as it got bigger, time went on, it kept getting bigger, and from which more stuff started coming out from nothing. And that's literally the way the scientists talk about it and describe it. And so that's what their faith is built on. Nobody's ever seen that, but that's what they believe. And that's fine. They can believe that. It is their choice. As, of course, Christians, we look at it from a biblical point of view, and God was the result of that Big Bang, if you will. And so, anyways, but there was also, they go on to how life came into existence. And the best that humans can do is they can actually create with special gases in an aquarium, put some gases in there, and then they can run electricity through that gases, which is supposed to, by all means, supposed to represent, electricity is supposed to represent lightning through those gases, which somehow they believe that is one of the gases that the planet used to have. But of course, it doesn't actually create life, but what it does is it creates a building block of life, which is a protein. But by all means, it certainly isn't life. But they say, or they believe that, well, then from that point on, it must have made the jump at some point to become life. No one's ever seen it, but that's what they believe. So it comes down to faith on what they believe. And honestly, it's what we believe as Christians is faith. That was in the first episode. The second episode, or the second presentation, was they were talking about the age of things. And of course, in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 17, talks about he who states his case first seems right until another comes and examines him. And this is so true. That's such a great biblical foundation to just always keep these things in mind. And for example, these are ice cores taken from Greenland. And those lines have actually been added in there. They don't actually look like that. But the point is, when they look through those layers of ice, they can see where it's light, dark, light, dark. And then conclusion they came to was, well, that must be a year. And that conclusion, there's 135,000 of those rings where it's light and dark, right? Meaning that there is summer, winter, summer, winter. When the summer comes, it melts a little bit of snow and gets compressed, and that would create, and it creates into ice, and then that would create what they would call one ring. And then it was like an annual ring on a tree. But what they don't like to advertise is World War II squadron that disappeared. Didn't actually disappear, but it got landed in Greenland. And when it landed, they ended up had to abandon their planes there. They went back 50-some years later and found that the planes were buried under, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like, how much? 75 feet? Okay, yeah. It was at 75 meters. I think it was meters, 75 meters, and 200 and some feet. Regardless, way more snow than anyone ever would have expected. And guess what? When they knew how many years when those planes were there, and when they dug down to try and retrieve one of those planes, guess what they seen? Layer, hundreds of layers. Wait a minute, we know that those planes have only been there for so many years, right? In reality, they reassessed it, and they came to the conclusion, oh, those compressed layers, that was actually just a warm day. You know what I mean? You see, when you get the other side of the story, it makes a whole lot more sense, right? And you can just imagine this: some young person in school, and of course a professor up front being really arrogant and just trying to convince everyone, oh, see, this is proof that the Earth is, well, you know, not necessarily millions of years, but at least 135,000 years. But in reality, it's a good observation, but a bad conclusion. Right? Good observation, bad conclusion. And this was another one, and I actually have a personal story I want to share. So this is New Mexico's unfinished symphony, started 250 million years ago. And of course, we all know stalactites, which come from the top, stalagmites, which get built from the bottom. It basically is mineral water coming down the stalactite and dripping onto the bottom. And as it comes down, it leaves a tiny bit. And they measure what the rate it is at, what it's been going at, and they would come to the conclusion at the same rate that it has been building in today's day, and they say, oh, it must have taken millions of years for that to happen. Of course, they found things like a bat. You can see the bat here. He's kind of like, he died, he landed on top of it, and either that bat decayed over millions of years and the drips of water were able to fossilize over top of it, or it simply happened a lot faster than anyone expected. And now this is where, so some of you may know, my wife and I, we took our 25th anniversary about a little bit, a month ago or so, and we went to this place here. And you're probably looking at it thinking, what is that? And I'm going to be honest, I went to England specifically to get this. And I'll explain it. Specifically to get and bring back this here, okay? Teddy bear. Some of you I've already talked about this with, and I didn't specifically want to get this one, but I got this one just as contrast, because when we go ahead, they hang these bears in that waterfall, and they said between 4 to 5 months, you get this. And we can turn around here, but. And when here's the soft one. Nothing. And by all means, I can show you guys this afterwards. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I went to England specifically. I wanted to see this waterfall. It's of course very much commercialized now, and they sell these bears. And anyways, but the point being is it happens in a much faster rate, depending on the mineral content in the water. It can happen in a very short amount of time, this whole fossilizing process. And I just thought, anyways, that's what I wanted, because it's kind of like in your face evolutionists. This is a teddy bear, right? and it's fossilized. Sorry, it's not fossilized, but it has the beginning process of it, and it already has a coating on the outside of the bear. And so it's kind of interesting to just go and observe and see it happening. And of course, I had to purchase one of the bears there as well. So actually, there's a video here, and Riston was going to show it. And this actually he's going to switch over right now. This video just kind of shows you in real life, and hopefully he's going to get the sound on. You can hear the water. It was a very nice place to visit. He had the water was dripping off, and you can hear it landing in the water. And then Rachel was doing a recording. She just kind of panned upwards and kind of caught it all on video, and you can see how everything is, how it is actually, things are being fossilized. There we go. Is it starting? It's starting on there, Riston. Yes, unfreeze it. And yeah. So the idea, oh, I think I see play at the bottom there. There we go. And there's all the teddy bears. They hang everything. They've hung COVID masks in there. There's some cups, and there's like even an old-fashioned camera, and they literally are doing it just kind of as a joke, and just they sell them, and they have even a hat from John Wayne there. People will come and visit, and they'll be like, oh, you know what, and they'll donate something. Go fossilize this, and they fossilize it, and then they end up and take it, and they put it in their little cabinet there, and they can kind of show it off. And so anyway, that was the fossilizing series, part of the series that we did. Now we want to get into and talk to you about, as soon as we switch over here, this was about the Neanderthals and the different types of skulls and fossilized bones that they find. And just to give you, whenever you see, because I know I've seen this, I'm sure everyone else has seen, you'll see remnants, or you'll see a reenactment or a recreation of what they believed this person looked like, based on the skeleton that they found, or the skull specifically in this case. And this is just to show you how much creative license is involved with it. This is the same skull that they used, and look at the two people. You can see there's a huge difference between, let me zoom in on it here. This guy here, he looks like, you know, could be just an average Joe, honestly. European. And of course then down below, this guy here, very much looks, you know, very much ape-like. It's the same skull. They literally are using their own creativity to what they believe it should look like. And so, I'll be honest, it's just what people prove what they already are, what they believe, and so they are trying to pass it off as being truth. But in reality, it can be taken either way. You can literally use that same skull and create whatever you want it to look like. And of course, this is Lucy. They came to this conclusion for what the head would look like, the skull of the head, which kind of looks very much ape-like. This is actually the only artifacts, skull parts that they actually have. And I asked the question, how do you get this from that? But again, they have their own idea of what it should look like, and that's what they come up with. And of course, they have everything else. This is what they have, all the remnants that they have left over. And those remnants, they actually, when they put Lucy on display, they actually put human hands on her as well as human feet. But in reality, they just aren't even there. But they're drawing their own conclusions, which are based on their bias of believing that humans came from, you know, a very primitive animal and evolved, and they trying to create the evidence to support it. All right, this was a last presentation that I did, and this was on rocks and the age of the Earth. And this is an island, Sirta, and it's actually by Iceland, and it looks just like a normal island. If you go to Iceland, trust me, a lot of the landscape looks just like this. But this island was created in 1963. There was an eruption, bubbled up out of the ground, and it spanned over a couple of months. this island was born. And then it wasn't long, vegetation, grass started to come up, and birds started to nest, over so many years. And people have gone and walked on it. Scientists, they actually don't want people to go on it because they want to try and see how it's going to, develop with no human interaction. But there has been some scientists that have gone on it, and their observations are, wow, this really looks just like any of the other islands that are here in Iceland. So it's just, again, when they talk about the age of the rocks and the age of how old something is, in reality, you can't just go by looks. And so they will go and they'll try and use scientific observation. What they'll do is they'll start off with a type of a mineral in it, and as it gets older, it changes into another mineral. Good observation. If it starts off at this parent element and it changes into another element we know it decays at this speed. Supposedly, they know the age of it, which is kind of surprising because it's always billions of years. But they have all these assumptions that there was no daughter element there present when it first was formed. There's a whole bunch of other flaws and holes in the argument. Regardless, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I wanted to just point out Grand Canyon. Remember we had a big picture of it? This is where the Colorado River started from, and the Grand Canyon was here. And remember how, if anyone's been to the Grand Canyon, there's literally a path cut right through the Grand Canyon. But this is actually where it starts. There's over 4,000 feet difference in height. So either water was running uphill for several millions of years to finally cut through the Grand Canyon, or something else happened. And we talked about how this would very likely could have been a land dam that eventually started to leak and it's burst forth and would have eroded away all of the dirt at that time. We don't know that for sure, but it is a logical conclusion we come to when we look at things like the elevations of the area. And of course the RIT project, thank you, the radioisotope and age of the earth. Now these guys here, it is a Christian group that takes samples and they pay to have secular labs do the testing on rocks. And guess they would actually go to different mountains where they know there was eruptions. Eruptions were coming out. And as those eruptions came out, they knew, it's been documented, this happened in 1972 in June. And they'll even have specific days. And then this slide over here happened in 1954. And they would take samples from there, from those eruptions which came from that mountain, and they would get those tested. And the oldest one was like 2-point-some million years old. The youngest one was still about, I think it was 500 and some thousand. I can't remember exactly, but the point being, then they make the argument that, well, when something is young, you can't use that method of aging something. So wait a minute. So if you know the age of it, that system doesn't work very good. But if you don't know the age of it, then that system works. Does that logic fit? No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. Anyway, and of course, one last one I wanted to point out was soft tissue that has been found in dinosaur bones. Now, up to this point, they thought that they thought that tissue, soft tissue, now this was, I think, being very conservative, but they thought that the very best that it could ever last was 100,000 years. But yet they found them in dinosaur bones that were 65 million years old. So wait a minute, instead of rethinking how they age dinosaur bones and thinking maybe that's a flawed idea, no, they say, well, I guess soft tissue must be able to last so much longer than we originally thought, right? They're literally trying to prove what they believe things should be. And so they try to mold it around. And I'm not going to say Christians are any different, but it comes down to it's based on faith, right? Both systems are based on faith. And so, question is, now up to this point I've talked about all the things that scientists, they call it science, but in reality, it's not science. It's assumption. Science is when there's definitely good science out there. I don't want to say poo-poo on science. Science is definitely a very good thing, but science is something that you should be able to test and retest and see and get the same result all the time. But all of these assumptions that they come to has been things that have happened in the past, and no way we can't even test those things because it's not possible. How you test the Big Bang Theory, right? So, but that's the things I was dwelling on and talking about all these different things that I just went through. But now I want to change and I want to talk about the Bible specifically and why we can look at the Bible as a reliable source of information, okay? And I'm not, we literally could spend days talking about specifics that the Bible has to offer. But I'm going to try and go through, I got about 8 topics I wanted to cover, and I'm going to go through them. And one of the arguments people will say isn't the Bible written by man? Yes, it is. So are the textbooks. They're also written by man. They're also, it's their theories, where at least man doesn't claim to be having this come from themselves. In fact, if I actually, you know what, with my lengthy quote up here from 2 Peter 2:19, could I get a brave soul to read it for me? It help keep you guys engaged.
And so we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well heed as a light that shines in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts, knowing this first, that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. For prophecy never came by the will of man, but holy men of God spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit.
And that's what's key right there, right? We're not taking any claim from ourselves, right? Man is literally, we're saying we're being guided by the Holy Spirit. And so I wanted to go through, this was number 1. Internally consistent. Okay? So the Bible, we've all heard these facts before. 66 books of the Bible, 39 Old Testament, 27 New Testament, written over the span of 1,500 years, which would be approximately 1200 BC, 1300 BC to about 100 BC, or sorry, 100 AD. And it's been 40 different, I've heard some as little as 35, as many as 40 different authors on 3 separate continents. Okay, so if you think about the span that it's been written over, and you think about how many people are involved, like I think about now, if I tried to get 40 people nowadays to write down what they believe religion is about, what kind of a thing you think you're going to, what kind of a conclusion you're going to get from everyone, right? Are they going to be all in a perfectly straight line saying the same thing? Not too likely. And so, that's what the beauty part about the Bible is. It harmonizes, it fits together. Literally, starting at the beginning of the Bible, right? We have creation, chapter 2, fall of man. Right there starts the redemption process. It's been introduced at that point, right? And then we go all the way through the New Testament, and then it follows the same thread, the same line, train of thought. And there's a lot of other information in there too. And if you want to read it from cover to cover, it's going to take you a long time, especially if you want to understand it. But by all means, when you read the Bible, you can see the consistency of what the Bible is teaching. And the whole process, what the Bible is teaching, what God is trying to teach humans, is how he's going to bring humans back into relation with him.
Amen.
He's going to show them how we are going to be united again. All right. Somebody help me out here. Consistency. All right. So the Bible, by critics, is oftentimes said to be like the telephone game. The telephone game. Everyone know what the telephone game is, right? So I can. You don't know? You haven't heard the telephone game? So I could start up in the air in the beginning. I could whisper into Jim's ear, brother Jim's ear. Yeah, you know what? You tell him something, and you only can say it once, and then he has to turn and tell the person beside him what he thinks he heard, and it would go through everyone on this side, and it would come over to Gail, and it would go through everyone on that side, and I would guarantee you, it would be different than what it started with, because you only hear it once. And they refer to the Bible as well. It's been because it's been transcribed so many times, something's been lost. It had to have been. It's been thousands of years. That's what the argument is. But this is where archaeology has come along, and they prove and show us things like the Dead Sea Scrolls. For those of you who don't know who the Dead Sea Scrolls are, 1947 to 1956, 11 caves in this location on the northwest shores of the Dead Sea. They basically found these scrolls, and the scrolls were it's the Old Testament, what we call, or the Old Testament Jews call it the Tanakh. And our oldest ones we had to this point were 11th century. New Testament we actually had quite a few of. We go back all the way back to, and we have those ones all the way through. Lots of manuscripts. But we actually don't have a whole lot of the Old Testament, because when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, a lot of information was lost there. Regardless, they ended up and found these scrolls, and they date them to perhaps, they haven't got it narrowed, it's about a couple 100-year window, but it was from as much as 300 BC to possibly 200 AD. But there's this huge window of between Christ and the 11th century that is empty. Like they don't have anything in between there. And so, this was a great opportunity to prove how the Bible, if it stays true or if it doesn't stay true to what it originally said. Because was a telephone game really what they say it is for the Bible? And here's the text. Actually, could I get a volunteer for this one? Can we trust the text? And it's referring to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Can I get anyone?
Sure. As Notre Dame professor Eugene Ulrich, chief editor of the Quran, biblical text for the Oxford Discoveries in the Judean Desert series, observes the scrolls have shown that our traditional Bible has been amazingly accurately preserved for over 2,000 years, and we say praise God.
Amen, for sure. Not only that, so when they actually got looking at, I think there was about 17. It wasn't 100% the same. There was 17 differences, and what they found was most of them were spelling differences on words, which probably would make sense as people's what do you call it? The language evolves and whatnot. Anyways, most of it was spelling differences. The other, there was a couple of words that were different, a couple of them. I don't remember the exact number. It was like not very many. And they said, when we put it in context, it didn't change what it said. Amen. Praise God, right? So, scientifically consistent. And you think, well, how can you prove something scientifically from something so far, from something being so old, right? But here we look at, there's back in the day, everyone thought that the earth was flat, right? I'll be honest, there's actually a group today, you can find them online, that actually believes the earth is flat. But Isaiah 40:22, it is he who sits on the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. It was describing what I can't remember, it was in the 14th, actually it may have been a little bit earlier than that, when they actually discovered that, and they figured out that, wait a minute, the earth actually isn't flat, it's actually round. And this Bible, but biblically, especially when Isaiah, that was all way before Christ's time, it was describing it as a circle. Now this is an interesting one. I appreciate this one as well. Or I appreciate them all, but this is the basic ingredients for soap, okay? Making soap. You have animal fat or vegetable oil. You need lye. You need water, and it helps if you have some sort of a disinfectant in there, something that's going to be antibacterial. Okay. Now, let's look to Numbers 19, 5, 6, and 9, and you can read it for yourself. But this is actually a recipe for making soap back in Moses' day. Then, so it's talking about, it's a process for purification spiritually, but we know now, looking back, it's actually purification physically as well. And so it talks about, then the heifer shall be burnt in his sight, that's the priest. Its it hides its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its offal shall be burnt. So it's talking about this heifer, which is one of the ingredients is animal fat. Going on the next verse, and the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet, so scarlet yarn like a thread, and cast them into the middle of the fire burning the heifer. So what are they adding here? What's cedar known for? Disinfectant, exactly. So is hyssop, actually. And then you also have scarlet, which is like a yarn, which also can add to as being an adjunct. You know, sometimes you get more aggressive soaps that work in the industrial trades, and the industrial soaps oftentimes will have grit in them, you know, like sand, and you can wash your hands and it takes dirt off really well. Well, that's what the scarlet thread yarn was going to be for. Something you can help take the dirt off. And moving on to 9, you can read 8 and 7. Didn't really apply to it, so I didn't put it in, but you can read to it later. And then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification. They take the ashes, and whenever they were doing their purification rituals, they would add water to it, aka they were making soap. You know, and I really appreciate that kind of wisdom, because I was just asking my wife last night about it. She dug up the information for me and was telling me that they actually didn't discover the best opportunity for washing until the mid-1800s. The mid-1800s. What they were doing is actually they had doctors who were practicing on cadavers, and then a woman would come in, and she would have to be, she was pregnant. And so they'd be like, oh, okay, let's go, and they wouldn't wash. They would just go straight over and they would deliver a baby. And then the women started getting diseases, and I can't remember the name of the common disease was, but they were getting sick and dying. And the mortality rate of the women went really, really high. And then somebody came along, actually, you're probably thinking, you probably heard this story before too, right? They discovered that, wait a minute, let's wash our hands in between. And so they started washing their hands, and guess what happened? The mortality rate of all the women went down. But they said, oh, it takes too much time. No, it takes too much time. We won't bother washing your hands. No, mortality rate goes back up. And they finally realized that, okay, it's really important to wash your hands. The Bible said that, by the way, back in like the 12th century BC, just FYI. Let's go to the next one. What's this next one talking? Number 4. Culture. The Bible virtually is accepted all over the world, in every country. Now, not all countries have the Bible because it's illegal to own a Bible and that, but most of the countries that have a public presence, it's accepted. Literally, all the Bible is accepted. It doesn't matter what culture you're part of. People still accept it. God is appealing to all walks of life. All walks of life. I mean, that in itself has got to say something, right? It's got to say something about its supernatural ability to reach out and touch people's lives. All right, archaeology consistency. Now, this one's really interesting. We can go into, and we already talked a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Hittites never existed, or did they? I say the Hittites because people oftentimes Hittites, everyone has heard the Hittites in the Bible, right? And critics of the Bible will say, well, the Hittites, they never existed. They didn't exist. Like there's no other than what the Bible talks about it, right? Which, by the way, there's thousands of manuscripts to support the Bible, thousands, literally thousands. And the next closest thing is Homer's Iliad, which has about 1,800. But that's a side note. It wasn't long, though. They started digging up out of the ground tablets, and guess what they were talking about? The Hittites, right? Even they said the same thing about King David. Oh, a king, yeah, sure, he was this really big king, but there's nothing outside of the Bible that actually teaches that King David even existed, right? And then in the early 90s, they found, guess what? Tablets with King David, right? Talking about the battles against the house of David. King David. You know, it's kind of I'll be honest, it's people, the critics, they like to say these things about the Bible, but in reality, when they say these things, it's not too long, and then they end up and find actually support biblically, and then of course the Bible's proven right. Okay. Well, what about Jephthah, right? We don't have any information on Jephthah because there's 1,000 names in the Bible. They can just literally keep choosing names. Oh, we don't find anything on this person. You know what? And it's not long after. They end up and find, archaeologists find artifacts that talk about that person's name, that talk about whatever they had said, oh, that person didn't exist. Proven again. The Bible is proven again. The Bible proves it again. The Bible proves it again. And in reality, it's kind of a blessing because it just shows the consistency of the Bible, right? All right. Historically, now when I say historically, I'm talking about other things, like there's not a lot, but there is a few people that will actually say, well, did Jesus ever exist? And actually, can I have somebody read this? This is, I can't remember this gentleman's name. There it is. Oh, no, right, sorry, at the top here. Tatius? So, this is what he wrote about Jesus. Not part of the Bible, this is actually what he wrote. So if I could have somebody read that, please. Pontius Pilate. You're doing a way better job than I would do, trust me. So, again, I mean, there's actually others, but I'm kind of going through this quickly because I know it's actually really hot in here, and so I'm just feeling it up here. Whew. But this gentleman here, Sir William, I don't believe he was Sir at the time, but he ended up became William afterwards, and he was a very critical thinker. There was this German train of thought, and he liked to use that method of analyzing information, and he looked at Luke, right? He was a physician, wrote the book of Luke. He also wrote the book of Acts, and this is how he describes Luke and how Luke records history. Someone want to read that one for me, please?
Luke is a historian of the first rank. Not merely are his statements of fact trustworthy. This author should be placed along with the very greatest historians. Luke's history is unsurpassed in respect of its trustworthiness.
And this gentleman, yeah, that's where the location where it's found. This gentleman actually was a skeptic. How often does that happen? So number 7. What's number 7? Now this is the personal level, right? Everyone who's converted to Christianity has had, and I mean, even if you were brought in it, you very likely you could have very well still had this type of an experience, which happens in your own personal life, right? And this is one of those things that it's really hard to prove scientifically. It's really hard to prove other than a change of character, right? I can remember Arden telling me a story about one of his relatives that he used to always see online in Facebook, and they used to post things that were, I'll just say, questionable. And then all of a sudden, she kind of went radio silent for a while, and then all of a sudden, she was posting new things that were biblical. It was Christ-like. There were things that were upholding and bolstering Christ's character. And it finds out later that, yeah, she had accepted Christ. One's character, God is the only one who can change one's character, right? Through his Holy Spirit, he works on us, and that's the personal experiences that we all will experience as Christians, becoming Christians, or even living our lives as Christians. We live it during the world, the way the world lives it, and then we have that transformation in our lives. Last one, okay? Last topic I want to bring to mind, prophetic. This is one I really love. All right. Peter W. Stoner, Professor Emeritus of Science at Westmount College. Now, he's actually passed away now. You can Google him and find out more information about him later if you'd like. But he, he was head of his department of science. He got his class together and basically said, let's look at the Bible. He was a Christian, but he was deliberately looking for prophecies that were pointing to Jesus. Looking for the prophecies that were pointing to Jesus, okay? And how many? And when were they written? Okay, there's 300 different prophecies, and you can actually find that really, really easily online. You can go on and find those prophecies. But before we get into what he found, now this gentleman here, he is describing the way Stoner came to his conclusions on his study that he had did. Okay? Can I get someone to read this one, please?
The mathematical analysis included is based upon principles of probability which are wholly sound, and Professor Stoner has applied these principles in a proper and convincing way.
Exactly. And so it's not just him coming up and pulling numbers out of the air. There's actual other people actually say no. He actually did a legitimate job of analyzing this information. Okay, for example, this is a prophecy, right? It happened before. It was long before Christ. Came up Zechariah 9:9. Anyone want to read it? And so when he came to his conclusion, because really they try to look at what is the odds of people actually fulfilling it. Maybe half of us in this room have fulfilled these prophecies, right? And so, but what they actually are looking at, this specific prophecy is when, of course, Jesus grant triumphant entry into Jerusalem, you know. But it's one thing for, let's say, I wanted to go there and I'd get on a colt and I wanted to ride into it. But what's different, though, what's a really big different defining characteristic is everyone there is treating you like a king, right? What happened when Jesus came in? Hosanna! They're laying palm branches down and he's riding in. I mean, it's not just one person decide they're going to get on a mule and start riding in. No, it's a group of people, a big group of people. The other people were expecting him to be a king. I mean, honest, I think that's an incredibly, incredibly conservative 1 in 100. Incredibly conservative. Personally, I think it would be in the 100,000s, but 1 in 100 or 1 to the power of 2, meaning 2 zeros, which makes 100. So you see how he's being very conservative in how he was coming to these analyses. How about this prophecy? Anyone want to venture onto it? And I think we can safely say that throughout Earth's history, there's definitely been people who have been wrongfully convicted, right? And out of the ones that have been wrongfully convicted, how many do you think of them would not defend themselves? If I was wrongfully convicted, you can guarantee I'm going to be piping up. I was like, I was even there. I didn't do it. I'm going to be telling all the evidence, right? Personally, I think this is very conservative as well. Very conservative. They say 1 in 1,000 or 1 to the power of 3. But in reality, he's trying to be conservative so that people can't call him and say that, you know what, he's being very biased in his observations and what he's trying to prove. They can't say that because he's being incredibly conservative. So, now, he said, let's look at the probability of fulfilling only 8 of the 300. 8 of the 300 prophecies. 1 to the power of 17. So that's 1 with 17 zeros after it. It's because the way these numbers work is they take the different, they go back to these two, and they would add them up, and you times them together, and then it ends up and gets more and more difficult the more prophecies that you add into it, because the chances of it happening of each prophecy is a number, which then it gets compiled, and it adds into it. So only 8 of them is 1 to the 17th power. Or 10 to the 17th power. Now, what does that number really mean? So they actually made an illustration. He made an illustration, Texas, okay, biggest state in the lower part. There's obviously Alaska's much bigger, but he's using this as an analogy in his book that he wrote. He said, oh, so if you take the state of Texas and you were to cover it in silver dollar coins, I think those are probably 50-cent coins, but silver dollar coins, 2 feet deep. That is 10 to the power of 17. Now imagine taking one of those coins, putting an X on it, throwing it back into the pile. This is the entire state of Texas. And then taking a blindfold person, putting them somewhere in this Texas state, and for them the first time bending down and picking up that, it's 2 feet deep, these coins, picking up that coin that you put an X on. That's what the odds are of just fulfilling 8 of the prophecies. Put it a little bit in perspective. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? 2 feet, Texas, a lot of coins there. Okay, now this one here, we can just read this first slide, and there's a couple other slides, and I'll make them, I'll kind of go over them. I'll just describe them really quickly, what they were trying to do. And Rachel was like, oh, that one's way too technical, so that's why I'm just going to explain it. But I think it's actually good to put it in perspective, because now what they do is they actually look at 48 of the prophecies. Out of the 300, they take 48 of them, and they apply it, and they come out with 10 to the power of 157. Can you imagine that? So 1 with 157 zeros behind it. Now, this was, so if they took 40 out of the 300 prophecies that are about Jesus, and they just and he had fulfilled all of them, and they just look at 48 of the out of the 300, and they're just looking at 48 of them, and they end up, and the conclusion that someone could fulfill 48 of those prophecies out of the 300, the odds of that happening is 1 to the power of 157. Does everyone understand that? And to put it in perspective, this is just where it gets a little bit on the technical side, but is everyone familiar? You've heard the term electrons before? Everyone's probably heard that term. So the electrons are one of the smallest things that we know of. And what they basically point out is they take 1 inch of electrons, and they put them 1 inch of electrons, and inside of that 1 inch of electrons, okay, the 1 inch of electrons, oh, I think I went one too many, there we go. The 1 inch of electrons, there is 10 to the power of 15. That's how many electrons are in 1 inch if you were to line them up single file, okay? Now this is, I'm just describing this because this is trying to express the probability of somebody who could fulfill 48 of those prophecies. Only 48, not 300, only 48. And so they're saying if you were to count those electrons, that's how many there is. Now if you were to count them in 1 inch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every minute you would have to count 250 of them. Okay, which works out to every second you have to count like 4.1 per second. Basically, the point is, if you were to start counting this 1 inch of electrons, it would take you 19 million years. If you were counting 250 per minute, okay? You'd be pretty old. Yeah, you might need someone to take over for you. Take a break once in a while. Now, okay, now this is a probability for someone fulfilling the 48 prophecies out of the 300, okay? So now what they do, now they're trying to express this. That's how small the electrons are. And they go on to basically describe how big the universe is. It's like 6 billion light years across. Everyone know what a light year is? It's basically how they measure distance in space. It's a really big, so when you turn your headlights on your vehicle, lights go out, the time for that light to come from your headlights to wherever it's hitting on the other side, that speed, that distance that it travels, so light year, your light travels this far in 1 year, and you know how fast light travels, that's telling you how big of an area this is, okay? So, what they're trying to say is, if you had basically the universe filled with electrons, and you took one of those electrons and painted it red, if you could do that, of course you can't even see it, and you send a person out into that, the first try, them finding that red electron is to the power of 150. Actually, sorry, it's not even to the power of 157. That actually, the universe, the amount of electrons in the universe is actually only a very relatively small percentage of what it actually is. Just trying to put a grasp, that's how impossible it is for anyone to actually fulfill these prophecies. And this is what Stoner ends up and makes the statement after he goes through and he analyzes all of this information. Does anyone want to read it for me? Amen. He also goes on to say, any man who rejects Christ as a Son of God is rejecting a fact proven perhaps more abundantly than any other fact in the world. So that's just the prophecy. I won't go any more into that because the idea, though, in order for someone to fulfill the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, it's unheard of. It's impossible. It is impossible. Now, and this is one of my favorites. I'm almost done here, folks. Hang on to me. Hang on. We're just about done. But the prophecy of Daniel, chapter 9. Now, it's one thing for the Bible to say and have a prophecy about something, and say that this is going to happen. But it's another thing for it to say, oh, it's not only going to happen. It's going to happen this year, this month, this day. And if you actually put two prophecies together, two different timelines together, you would actually even find the hour when the prophecy would be fulfilled. The Bible actually says it. In the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, and I'm not going to go through the prophecy, but the point that it brings is it actually describes and talks about when Christ was going to be, when he was going to be baptized, when he was going to be crucified, and when the church was basically going to go to the world. And if you were to hold that prophecy up with the prophecy of Leviticus chapter 23, where it talks about the annual feasts. There's 6 annual feasts, 1 weekly feast, Sabbath actually, 6 annual Sabbaths, and it actually talks about the hour. It goes by the month and the days and the hours, the month, days, and hours when they were to perform these rituals, which were all object lessons that were to point towards Christ. When you use Leviticus chapter 23 and Daniel chapter 9 and put them together and use the information to build the whole picture, it literally describes when Christ was going to come. It's amazing. It really is amazing. It blows my mind to actually study that and to see how accurate the Bible was. You know, and even there's some critics out there who will say things like, well, you know, Daniel, it's written in the 6th century. There's some critics that will say, well, you know, it was probably because in Daniel chapter 1, you know how chapter 2, how it talks about the stone, the statue with the head of gold and the bronze. You know, we all know as Adventists, it's very common knowledge. And so the bronze thighs and the iron legs. And of course, people don't like to admit that. Oh, that actually it must have been written at a later date because they got it so accurately. Right? But it doesn't even matter. Daniel was actually pointing out when Christ was going to arrive, when he was going to be baptized. It lays it out. Sorry, I'm getting a little excited. So this is an interesting characteristic. I got one more slide after this, and it's our closing slide. And how does the Old Testament describe God from thank you very much. Distinguish gods from other gods. He is the creator, absolutely. There's something that he does that no other gods do. And you're right, the creation is definitely one of them. And I'm specifically talking about, and this is where he actually described, he says things twice, right? Remember, the former things of old For I am God, and there is no other. He says it once. I am God, and there is none like me. That's a pretty hefty statement. Declares the end from the beginning. Wait. The end from the beginning. So he's telling you what's going to happen. And from ancient times, things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. What's he say? What's he doing here? He's declaring the end from the beginning. He's prophesying. That's one thing that no other gods can do, is prophesy. And God, being the loving, caring God that he is, he wants to give us the heads up, right? He wants to give us the knowledge ahead of time so we're not surprised, we're not taken out, we're not being, what do you call it? Blindsided, that's it. Blindsided, we know what's to come, and he lets us know this information ahead of time. And that is a characteristic that no other God can say they can do. So, anyway, I will have one more presentation after this one, and I hope you guys appreciate it. I know I absolutely really appreciate going through these kinds of things. By all means, if we can all stand, please, for our closing hymn.